When we do this, you'll see how hard it is for someone to convert. So when it happens, it's an act of God. So the first stage is not really a stage. It's just the existing context. The original paradigm. And here's how I would describe it. We all begin with a certain set of rules we have determined we're going to live by. As long as those rules work for us, we're not a candidate for conversion. My world is going along fine, and the rules I have in place seem to be sufficient to make sense of the world. Had a friend who was Hindu in college. He was happily Hindu. He was not in any intellectual or moral or angst of any kind. He was not a candidate for conversion. We could just be friends and compare, this is what my faith does for me, this is what his does for him. Do we have any crossover and things we can appreciate? But there are moments in people's lives where the reality of the world is not sufficient to make sense of the world as they know it. Death of a child can do that. The loss of a job, loss of your health. There's a lot of things that can make you wake up and go, the rules I have to live by, they're not sufficient for this moment. You ever been there? So if the crisis, if the context doesn't make sense of the world, your second stage is a crisis of some kind which brings you to that crossroads. And it can be a physical crisis. It can be a social crisis. My sister moved to Ohio and didn't have a friend in the world there. That created more crisis. It can be ideological. There are people who find the illogic of Christianity that they were raised in to be a stumbling block. It's an intellectual crisis. If the crisis is bad enough, they will begin to go on a quest for a better set of understandings to make sense of it. If they don't find it, oftentimes they will regress and go backwards and just go back to the original context, the original paradigm, and pretend that that problem didn't exist. I'm not going to think about it. I'm going to try not to ever be in that position again where my faith is questioned. And we get further away from the things that challenge us. You ever know that person? You know, they're just not even going to talk about it anymore. The reality is, when we're on a quest, it's because we're trying to solve something. I don't think it was here. Somebody in the church recently came to me and said, I'm worried about my son. He's become an atheist. And I said, no, you hadn't. Don't worry about that. Most of the people I know, including me, who went through a period of atheism in their life, they're on this quest for a better paradigm. They're struggling, and sometimes, I put it, arguing with God over the way He built things. So the word atheist doesn't mean what you think it means. It means we're in a quest. Now, if you're an alcoholic and you've, wound up destroying your life, you may be forced on this quest until you get this solved. I've known folks who did that. Generally, on that quest to find a better paradigm to make sense of the world, there is an advocate that steps into the picture. If you've been part of the 12-step world, sometimes that will be your sponsor, who steps in as a tangible human being that says, you've been living this way. There's a better way to live that actually works. Can I show it to you? Can I be your advocate for a new way? This is what happens in churches. Somebody is looking for, I don't like the church I'm in, I can't find a church. I need to find a way to connect to God. And wow, I met Trish at the laundromat. And she becomes an advocate for, well, you tell me you've got a church that's not like the ones in my past. Well, I'll come and check it out. Sure, I'll come. The advocate plays an important role. Almost never in my research did I find somebody who was converted by a Gideon Bible in an empty hotel room. I mean, God bless them for passing out Bibles. I'm glad that they're there, and I'm not saying God can't use that. But generally an advocate has flesh and blood tied to them. And if you came to faith as an adult, you can probably think of the person who led you to that moment, who was a tangible representation of a better way to live. That's a powerful thing. That alone is not enough to bring about the point of conversion. At some point, that advocate has to introduce you and take you out of the culture you're in and drop you into an actual community of faith where people are living this out. That's the important part of the advocate. When I got engaged for the first time, not to my wife, that marriage fell apart, but this is a good illustration. Most people at the University of Houston, where I lived, I ran the dorms. I had been there for 7 years as a student. You could do that in those days. They knew me as a single guy. And I didn't date a lot. When I met Candace and we became a couple over the summer, we came back to school, and there was another couple that had hooked us up, and they introduced us to the community of people that hung out as couples. I was kind of putting on this new way of life. Will they accept me as a couple rather than an individual? I don't know. But I know what I've had back there being single. I've had enough of that. Nothing back there I need. I like this idea of having a new life and being a new kind of person with a partner. And we were trying on community to see if they treated me the way they treat each other, and do I fit? And all of that takes place within the context of community. At some point, whether it's a church that you've stepped into or a new community, a new way of life, maybe you joined a cult, I don't know, but at some point, you find yourself living this way, and you begin to make a commitment. You say, I don't have enough information to be sure I'm making a right decision. There's never enough information, by the way. It's always a leap of faith. I don't know what I'm getting myself into and committing to, but I know what I've had. And I know that I'm done with that. So I'm going to go ahead and take a leap of faith and declare myself. Speak it with your mouth and let people hear you say it. That's the point of commitment. If there's a moment where you are converted, it's at that moment. But sometimes it's hidden. There are a lot of, now here's how husbands of church-going wives come to faith. They follow their wife to church and they sit in the pew for 6 months or a year or 5 years. It doesn't matter. At some point, they will commit. And it'll be another 6 months before they say it out loud. Because they don't want to look wishy-washy. You know? But at some point, they will make a declaration of that out loud. And they will begin to live into that communal experience. Now, here is the part that I would share with you. The most traumatic part of conversion is stage 7. If you are a drinker being converted from an alcoholic life to a sober life, you have to change all your friends. All the things you did at night when you popped the cork and started drinking, all those have to change. The more dramatic the community shift, the more traumatic the consequences. Think about these people who move from the Middle East and go from being Muslim their whole life to being Christian. Their very life is at stake. They change everything. They lose family. They lose people. They lose everything. Consequences are where you pay the heavy price in conversion. Does that paint a picture for you? Have you ever heard it laid out like that? You had raised your hand. Does that can you name your advocate who brought you to faith? Okay. Praise God. Okay. Some of us need to be moved an inch at a time. Yeah. Well, it might have been a crisis if you hadn't drifted toward Christ. Anybody here have kids you worry about? You know, kids, children. Are they on this kind of path?
Well, I was going to say they were, but I've seen the change and I've seen the commitment in both of them. So they took my youngest one, he was almost 40. He's a strong Christian. He rides a Harley, but you all know that.
Yeah, I think there's some people in heaven with Harleys. And it can even be much smaller. It doesn't have to be to Christianity. I've seen your husband come around to actually coming to church with you. And he was 50 years. And so there's been like George, a progression, and he needed, I think he's beginning to find the community here a place where he can act out.
And he's very comfortable here, which I do think that is, but I think the influence of my son affected him more than me.
Oh, that's interesting. Your children affected him. One of the things that we see in the families that came to faith, 75% of them were brought to faith by a family member. Children go through confirmation class, and 2 years later, their dad begins to get involved in church. A couple gets married, and the wife says, "Oh, we're going to church." And there's that slow assimilation into one of the things that they always told us in planting churches, starting new communities. You don't have to start with what do we believe, because that's the first thing on the webpage, right? This is what we believe. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe in the Bible. Yeah, everybody does. Thank you. It's what do you believe about those things that's more important. But what we always rely on, people need to belong to something before they believe. If I give you a list of things to give to your husband, say, okay, you're one of us if you can believe this, 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 and this. Well, that's nice if you're building a club. But he's not going to look at a list and say, okay, I'm 8 out of 10, I'll come and give it a shot. That's not how that works. If we would allow people to be one of us without giving them a litmus test. You're not Christian yet? I don't care. Come serve at our food pantry anyway, because you're fun and I like you. People need to belong to something before they believe. See, what will happen is if we find somebody who's not Christian and we give them an excuse to come and be a part of this. Say it's something as simple as passing out food. 6 or 8 weeks in, he's going to be passing out the food, and he's going to lean over to his neighbor and go, what do we believe again about this? See, now he's begun to ask the questions, and he's already feels a part of this, and now he wants to make sure that he's not violating the norms of his community, and so he will open himself to having his beliefs shifted and changed and massaged and altered. But, George, if you came to church with your wife, the rest of the church probably considered you a part of the community of faith, and everybody here believed, and you probably felt like that's my church before you ever actually said that's my Lord. You believe after you belong. That is the power of being part of community. Now, having seen that path, it goes from your original understanding to some kind of crisis, and maybe it doesn't have to be a big one. Like you were saying, it was a relational crisis. This is not going to go well if I don't go with my wife to church. It's important to her, so that's enough that I'll see if I can't figure out a way to put up with this because it'll make her happy. There's your exploration, and you didn't have to explore very far. But eventually an advocate steps in, somebody who says, you look at it and you go, I don't know if I can do this, but he did it, and I like him, and I could be him. I could do it that way. There's an example of how I could be that. Then they introduced me into community, and wow, I'm beginning to get there. What it points out is the incredible, and this is on each of you, the incredible pressure there is for us to have healthy, emotionally stable advocates for Jesus Christ and for St. Mark's. You know, if my mom comes down here from East Texas and moves into St. James with my dad, she's able to drive and get out. It's my dad who can't do all that anymore. My mom is in crisis. Her paradigm is shattered. She can't live in East Texas with my dad anymore. She comes down here. She's in crisis. And she's trying to rebuild her life and find a way to live in her retirement that she never pictured. And so at some point, she's on a quest. And I think that quest is going to lead her here. I can be the helper as her son, but I'm not her advocate. She's going to have to find somebody closer to her age that says, yeah, it's a pretty good place to hang out during the week. I come up and answer phones, and we do things together, and there's stuff we can, there's a lot we can do here. She needs an advocate, and I'm looking for somebody here to be that advocate for her. So they can call her up and say, hey, we're going to go have coffee. You want to go with us? I'll come by and pick you up. And introduce her to a community of people who can let her see how do women whose husbands are dwindling have a healthy existence in a community like this. I have no doubt that there's a place here for her, but I can't be that advocate. I need an advocate for her. And at some point, she's going to wake up and she's going to go, that's my church, and those are my people, and this is where I belong. And what she can't picture right now, sitting in her house in East Texas, she will someday be converted to. And that is the idea that living in the city ain't so bad,
How do you go about getting an advocate? I mean, do they just show up? How do you search for an advocate? And we can do this later if you don't.
The question was, how do you search for an advocate when you're in need of one?
I mean, I know you're asking for help for people, but, I mean, they just don't pop up.
They don't just pop up. There's always prayer involved. I've been praying. Well, there's two kinds of praying. There's on my knees praying for my mom, and there's what I call haranguing prayer, where I harangue my mother and tell her, you got to get out of there, you got to get out of there, you got to get out of there, trust me. There's other ways to live. But if it's a healthy community, we're hungry for an advocate. My son and I are in the process do on my own. We're able to do together because we've got a community of people. My best friend lost 45 pounds 2 years. He's kept it off. And he's changed his eating behaviors and his drinking behaviors and all. And over the last, year and a half, I've watched him and I thought, I could do that if I ever got to that place. Well, he's given me the belief that this is a permanent thing, that you can, thought. He's my advocate for a better way of living. And in that, grabbing my son to do this, for on a journey into a new and around us and not eating every donut that we will cling to tenuous advocates. Sometimes the advocate doesn't know they're an advocate. Sometimes invited somebody in was at the right place at the right moment. You know, sometimes it's mom and dad, and suddenly they see their son-in-law come to church, which you never thought was going to happen. Things like that, you became an advocate without realizing that you're the tangible, focused representation of a better way to live. Yeah. And I think we all have seen transition. You can see how long it takes, tired of it, and turn around and go back the other way. My original paradigm is just fine. But there's something about making that commitment that seems... There have been churches that I've been in. I've served churches. I won't tell you which one, for their sake, that were not healthy and had no advocates that could bring anybody in. Because you look at it and go, whoa, that's the island of misfit toys. You know, there is a leadership concept that people won't follow people with less leadership skill than them. If we run away all of the people who know how to lead here, and a good leader walks in the room, they'll be here about 10 minutes and go, if I stay, I'm going to wind up being in charge of this mess. I'm going to go across the street. You can say you're a Christian, but if that's not what you live out, you're absolutely right. The advocate is generally somebody who has authenticity. Today my sermon, I wanted to give permission to not have 100% down. And somebody came up to me and said, thank you. I didn't realize that I was okay. Just giving somebody a tangible representation of somebody who looks real, that is not a plastic model of what Christianity ought to be, That's off-putting and... Yeah. My kids and I talk about, because we've been to a lot of places, we talk about the plastic bowl of fruit that is Christianity. And some places major in that really nice plastic banana there. Real fruit has blemishes, but it's authentic. It feeds. There's the real nourishment there. There's truth there that, I don't know. Like I said, this is too heady stuff for the confirmation class. What we're going to do there is we're going to walk through the Apostles' Creed and show them what each of those things mean. This is what our people believe. And, that will help them understand at a baser level where to start. Because they're not carrying the doubts that we carry. They will, but they will have that foundation to fall back on if we train them right. They are 6th and 7th grade, so 11, 12, 13. And they're eating this stuff up. When I did the Ten Commandments game, we did with the pennies, and they all counted up their score, because we went through each of the 10 Commandments, and I made them give back any pennies that don't represent. If you haven't honored your father and mother 100%, how much have you? Well, I've honored them 70%. Okay, give me 3 pennies out of that 10. Give me, And so at the end, we all added up our pennies. And all the pennies you surrendered to the pot, those are your sins. And if you were an ancient Jew, the only way to get your pennies back was sacrifice. So, and you can't be right with God without 100 pennies at all times. You have to have 100 pennies at all times. Yeah, see? Yeah, there's that. So we're there, and I said, okay, so you got to have 100 pennies to be right with God and to go to heaven. How many do you have? 75. Well, how do you get your pennies back? Well, you can do a sacrifice for each one of those. Or the reason we follow Jesus is that Jesus pays for your pennies. He gets your pennies back for you. And one of the boys sitting there, barely paying attention like a 13-year-old boy will do, he was laying on the floor playing with his pennies and stacking them. And he was listening. He sat up and he looked at me and he said, wait a minute, that's how it works? And I'm like, yeah, I got one. A light bulb went off. It's like, really? That's how that works. That's why we followed you. Okay. To see a kid get it. And of course, everybody else in the room went, what did I miss? But they're going to remember those kinds of things. They're going to associate. And then what I did at the very end, I had gotten some fresh, crisp, uncirculated $1 bills, and I traded them their handful of pennies for a whole $1. And they got it, you know. That's, but, you know, it's got to be baseline. And at this point, I may be their advocate for a better way, you know, at that simple stage of life. Some of them will remember me for even good things. I don't really have anything else. Thank you guys at home for watching. I think next week is going to be our last week in this Sunday school class because we're coming up on Holy Week. And the things I'm doing with the young people in the confirmation class, we're going to prepare for baptism and confirmation and do a dress rehearsal. And Palm Sunday, they're going to help me in worship by reading scriptures and being the ushers and all of that. So, but anyway, guys, thank you. Yeah, with my mom. Oh, she's already figured out what to do with that. She's tired of the house. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, she's ready. She's ready. Guys, thank you for letting me do Sunday school this way. After we get done with Easter and we move into close to the summer, I think I'm going to do another pastor's class, a 4-week Methodist beliefs class. Just a walk through where we are with the Methodist Church. What do we believe? We got a lot of folks that have that are here but don't know our traditions. You know, we got a closet Lutheran here. So we can pull those things out. So I'm looking forward to that, and God bless you. Thanks for playing. And if you got any of these left, I'll take them. Oh yeah, if you wrote on it, keep it.